call, and anyone that does so will be removed. Okay, Saf, I'm ready to start. Can you share my screen, or am I able to share my screen?
Yeah, you are a co-host, so feel free to go ahead.
Cool. All right, so let's get started. And today we're going to be talking about defunding police. Defunding is in quotation marks because a lot of people seem to have an issue with the language. But honestly, what we're talking about here is reinvesting into our communities. So we're talking about taking money from one source and then being able to transfer that money over to our communities in order to just make them a bit more equitable as we live in them. So up on our agenda for today, first I'm going to be talking about the ACB Network, some of the scope of our work, as well as our advisory committee. So those are the people that govern the decisions that the network makes. And then we'll be moving on to talking about the relationship that exists between policing and Blackness, as well as just some anti-Black police practices and police violence. And after that, we're going to be talking about the defund movement. So why do we want to defund police? And why don't we want instead to go to reform? So the ACB Network, for some people that may not know, it began about 2 to 3 years ago. And our vision states that we envision a future where African, Caribbean, and Black people can engage fully in civic, social, and economic opportunities that are available in the region without systemic barriers related to anti-Black racism as it pertains to our health and overall well-being. So I would say with the network, we don't provide outward-facing services. We are very much focused on systems level work. So tackling the anti-Blackness that exists within systems, as well as focus more on advocacy. And then another element of our work is community building. So with community building, we know that a lot of the times when we're having conversation about systems level work, sometimes that language isn't as accessible or sometimes people may not know. So we also want to build up capacity within people for them to be able to digest information that's presented to them. And we want to make sure that we're all on the same playing field, right? We want to bring awareness. We want to bring the knowledge to our community, and that's part of the work that we want to do with community building. So that would be something similar to this presentation that I'm giving out here today. So the network itself, it began with a series of some community consultations. So these consultations happened from, I would say, 2016 and 2017. This is where we invited the broader Black community to join us. First of all, to have a healing space, because a lot of us go through racism every single day. We don't get to talk about it within ourselves in a healing way. So not necessarily talking about our trauma to influence people and to prove that it exists, but talking about our trauma, knowing that we can find support within each other, just because we all have those lived experiences. So other work of the consultations were to ask our community members, what do they feel like is lacking within the Waterloo region? Or what are some areas of focus that we as a network could tackle at the systems level? And all three consultations had over 60 attendees. So it was heavily influenced by community input. And honestly, it was only influenced by community input. And so the community selected 3 areas of focus that they identify were immediate in terms of addressing within the Waterloo region. So that was health and wellness, policing and criminal justice, as well as economics and employment. So the network itself, I think there's also something to point out with our name, where it's not just a Black network or African or Caribbean. Very often, a lot of our identities are formulated into just one blanket umbrella of Black, right? But there are cultural differences that exist within Africans, within Black Canadians, as well as within Caribbean descendants. So our group is very much Pan-African, And we were very intentional in saying ACB because we want people to know that there is a distinction between all of our identities. And it's a form of erasure to just blanket us all under one blanket umbrella of Black. However, we also share a lot of similarities too. So one of the other reasons why the network was developed was just because we wanted to leverage some limited resources that exist within our community. So that would be information sharing, collective action, as well as just amplifying voices of the ACB community in Waterloo region. And this is our lovely advisory committee. So they're the ones that pretty much talk about any decisions that are going to be made on behalf of the network. We tried very much to get representation from the Pan-African diaspora. So meaning we wanted to have equal representation of people that have Black Canadian roots, individuals that have African roots, as well as those that have Caribbean roots. Just because all perspectives of the story are necessary if we want to talk about community building for our Black community. So at the very top left, there's myself. So I am the Community Development Coordinator for the ACB Network. I am the one and only employee. Everyone else that you see on your screen gives up their lovely hours to be able to get the work for the network done. And right beside me on the photo there, I don't know if you guys can see as I point, but this is Ruth Cameron, who's to the right of me. And Ruth Cameron is one of our advisory committee members, followed to the right by Tennille Warren. And then after that, on the right again, there's Carlene Duff. And furthest on the right, we have Donnelly McIntyre. And then now starting at the bottom, from the bottom left, we have Sian Wilson, followed by Fikr Worku, followed by Ishmael Mohammed, and then we have Zach Ahmed, as well as Victoria Rodney. All right, so we are now jumping into the bulk of this presentation where we actually get into police defunding, as well as the relationship that exists between policing and Blackness. So some anti-Black police practices. Racism experienced by racialized people in Ontario's criminal justice system is pervasive. It extends from systemic issues embedded within the court system, as well as court processes, to prison practices and routine aspects of policing outside of legal institution. So this would be like police stops as well as arrests. And just to kind of go more into the history, I was reading Robin Maynard's Policing Black Lives, which is an amazing book. I would recommend everyone to get it if you have not read it yet. It pretty much traces the foundations of policing and their relationship to Black lives from slavery as well as pre-slavery all the way up until today. Because a lot of the things that are happening now and a lot of the things that we're experiencing, the tone was very much set in the past. And as Robin Maynard points out, policing evolves out of a desire to protect white settler state from the fabricated criminal dangers of Blackness. So within the 19th and the 20th centuries, anti-Black hysteria equated Blackness with pathological criminality. This means that all of the messaging that was sent out was pretty much saying that criminality is inherent to Blackness, and a lot of the systems that exist today, especially policing and especially criminal justice, it still holds that same foundational belief that criminality is inherent to Black people. So the exclusion, well, actually, Maynard explains also that hyper-surveillance and over-policing of Black communities continue to maintain white dominance across all aspects for life. So I think that's just important to note before we continue. So on the screen here, I have two articles that were posted by The Record and just screenshot of the titles. So the first one says, Waterloo Regional Police is 4 times more likely to stop you if you're Black. This is one of the things that I would say every single Black person knows. It's something that we've been taught since we were young, that you should carry ID. There will be moments when police stop you, even though there's no reason to. So as you can see, even the data suggests that police will often stop you because of your Blackness. And then the article at the bottom talks about something that happened recently within our community. and specifically within the Black Somali community here in Waterloo Region. There was a man just a few weeks ago, I believe it was around the weekend of July 6th, so that Sunday, and there was a violent police interaction that happened with him with our regional police officers. So I want to say that police brutality is another element that comes with anti-Black practices that exist within the police force. So some other anti-Black practices within policing, they can present themselves through surveillance of neighborhoods. So we've had people that come to us letting us know that there's always police in their neighborhoods. Nobody knows what they do, nobody knows who they talk to or why they're there, but they're always parked. You can see their vehicles there, you can feel their presence. Even once when the ACB Network actually held a meeting at the Chandler Community Center, this was about a year and a half ago, there were about 4 police cars that passed outside during the duration of that 1 to 2 hour meeting, right? So that much police surveillance and police presence is not normal. It puts people on the edge, and people just are not comfortable within their neighborhoods anymore because you always feel like you're a threat. And if you're perceived as a threat as you navigate your life, it's also going to impact you and how you actually enjoy your life. So another well-documented practice of anti-Blackness within policing is carding. As you can see within the article, carding is very pervasive. It happens within every single police force. Some provinces within Canada have actually made carding illegal, but we all know that it doesn't stop carding. And we've also gained intel that sometimes they reword it whenever police are filling out official documents, so it doesn't necessarily look like carding. However, it's still that collection of data from people that are within the community. So also when it comes to charges and incarceration for minor crimes, Black, Indigenous, and racialized people are usually incarcerated at a very, very high rate in comparison to white individuals. So for charges that other people may get a slap on the wrist for, let's say prior to legalization of marijuana, a white individual could potentially be caught with marijuana, and police might attribute that to being a mistake, right? So they may say that this is a warning, make sure next time we don't catch you with it. So they are given opportunities to make mistakes. Whereas if you're caught with drugs and you are Black or a person of color or Indigenous, there's a very high likelihood that at that point you would be criminalized and you would enter the criminal justice system. So other methods of anti-Blackness within policing include unwarranted car stops. This is when police will stop you for driving just because you are Black, as well as police brutality, which I touched on earlier, and just the overall criminalization of Blackness. Criminalization when we're outside walking, criminalization when we're going to shop in stores being followed, criminalization as we're outside playing in the park with cops watching our playgrounds, criminalization within the education system. There's also criminalization in the child welfare system to prison pipeline, because that very much exists as well. A lot of Black youth and Indigenous youth that are within the child welfare system majority of them will find themselves also interacting with the criminal justice system. And so all of these kind of perpetuate criminalization just as you live as a Black person, right? So we are not afforded the opportunity to live worry-free because at every moment there's this perceived threat that people think we pose to society, and therefore all of our movements and all of our interactions, they need to be monitored and they're surveilled. This is just a graph I pulled up online. And so it just kind of goes over carding that has happened within the Waterloo region. And it talks about the number of people that were stopped by race, the percentage of all stops by race, as well as the ratio of police stops in terms of population. So as you can see, as suspected, the majority of people that are stopped by the police are white. This is because Waterloo region itself has a very large white population. Black people only make up about 2% of the population, with Indigenous as other racialized folks making less than 15% of the entire Waterloo population. Yeah, so there's actually a 13% visible minority population within Waterloo region. But at the bottom there, that's kind of the important part, where you're taking a look at proportionality. So there are 2% of Black people within the region, but when we're carded and when we're stopped by Waterloo Regional Police Services, it exceeds that 2%. It's almost nearly quadruple that amount. So we're stopped at a much greater rate than we actually exist within our population. And you can also see those statistics, like that bar is very long, which should be alarming to everyone else. And then you can also see the comparison with other visible minorities as well as other white people that are in the region. So next we're going to be talking about police violence. There's a lot of police brutality that happens within our community. A lot of people like to think that police violence only occurs within the States, just because that's where we see a lot of the videos that come with police violence. And there's just this perceived myth that anti-Blackness and racism does not exist within Canada, and that Canada is a post-racial society, right? So I would say look at the data, and within that data, you'll actually see that Canada is not a post-racial society, and that Canada actually has a lot of incidents that happen with police brutality, police violence, as well as police fatalities. So if you take a look at the graph on the right-hand side there, this is data that was collected by CBC, pretty much tracing incidents of police violence that have occurred within Canada from the year 2000 all the way up until 2020. As you can tell, there is disproportionality within, once again, Indigenous as well as Black people. So for white people, you can see that percentage of the population is very high. I would say maybe around 75% or so of the population. And their percentage of victims for fatalities that have happened between the year 2000 and 2020 falls a little bit above 40%. Whereas when you get to Indigenous, like that bar is very alarming because the percentage of victims that have died to police brutality within Canada is far greater than the actual population, right, of Indigenous people that exist within our nation. And the same can also be seen for Black people, right, where we're once again disproportionately affected by policing. We're disproportionately dying. We're disproportionately being recipients of police violence than we actually exist in the population. And you can also see statistics that exist for other racialized minorities, such as Asian, South Asian, Arab, those that are unspecified, and Latin American. So I would say the two prominent ones are Black and Indigenous, with Indigenous far exceeding the Black population in terms of fatalities that have happened. And that can also come with the colonial mindset, right? Indigenous people experienced a genocide within our country. So that pervasive mentality of eradication of Indigenous lives, it still exists today. And it's still happening within Canada, and I'm sure it still happens within our region as well. So one key thing about police and police violence is, who do you call when the police are the ones committing a crime against you? And truth be told, there's really not a single body that holds police accountable. There is the SIU that exists within Toronto, as well as just within Canada. So they are there to investigate instances of police violence or police deaths. And the SIU themselves, it's police policing police. The people that make up the body of the SIU are ex-police officers, are people that have interactions with police. So how exactly can we as a society expect to function and expect to provide so much power to police when there's no actual physical body that holds police accountable and makes sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? Another trend is also that a lot of the victims that fall privy to police violence as well as fatalities are individuals that suffer from mental health and substance abuse problems. So right now we're telling individuals with mental health and substance abuse that they really don't matter and that their presence is not necessary within society. So if we're killing people for having mental health problems and for having substance abuse, why would we opt to have that option instead of making sure they receive the help that they deserve and should be receiving? So now we're going to be talking about the defund movement overall. So defunding the police is not something specific to Waterloo Region. There has been an overwhelming amount of municipalities, cities, provinces within Canada that are all requesting for divestments of funds from police services to community-led services instead. So this is just a screenshot provided from the website, defund.ca. So I can just take everyone through the website right now. So defund.ca pretty much looks as this. It provides a source for a lot of cities and provinces within Canada that are actually organizing to have police defunded. And so this gives an option for individuals to be able to call regional councillors, to be able to email councillors, to be able to send tweets talking about the defunding of police. And it also provides a lot of great resources that go into policing and the body of policing, why it exists in our society, how it is disadvantageous for Black, Indigenous, and racialized people, as well as just other reading resources that individuals can have if they want to learn more about defunding police, or as they also include, if they want to learn more about police abolition, which is not what we're doing here. So we're asking for divestments of funds. We're not asking for abolition. Okay, so why do we want to defund? The call to defund police initially came with the Black Lives Matter Solidarity March that took place just about 2 months ago now, because we're into August. So this happened on July 3rd, 2020, and it was inspired by the events that were happening within the States, but also it took note of the police brutality that exists within Canada as well, as the march was honoring Regis, who was recently killed in Toronto by Toronto Police Services. So when we talk about defunding, we don't necessarily mean that the police force itself is gone entirely. What we're talking about is that we have to rethink the way our society currently functions, and we have to envision a better future, a more equitable future that takes into account the lives that are harmed by police. So talking about defunding police, it does mean that now we're funding social services that can prevent crime from happening in the first place. And we're also redefining the type of calls that police respond to, right? So as you saw earlier, most of the police deaths came from people with mental health as well as substance abuse issues. So why, instead of calling police, can we not fund services that can actually adequately support people with mental health, right? We can fund harm reduction that can adequately support people that have substance abuse problems. So we have to think about the role of policing within our society and why we're expecting police to do so many of our social services that they're not trained to do. And even if they were trained to do them, there's still the pervasive power that comes with policing, where police brutality is supposed to be a last stop. Violence for police is supposed to be their last stop. However, we're finding more and more often that violence is their first resort. So we're saying no, we don't want violence to be the first resort, nor do we want police to be the first responders. We want people to receive services that they need and services that are provided by individuals that have the training, that have the knowledge, and that are able to actually give the support that's needed. So when you reduce police funding and you go beyond the existing rules within our system, you reduce police power, and more city funds become available to put counselors, psychologists, and social workers within our schools instead of having school resource officers. Right, so within the Waterloo Regional School Board, there are about 11 school resource officers that migrate between different schools, ranging from elementary all the way up until high school. So we're saying, why have SROs when the schools don't have counselors? A lot of our schools don't have social workers. A lot of our schools don't have psychologists, but they do have police, right? So what exactly do we find important within our society? We also want to be able to provide adequate housing and affordable housing for people. A lot of the causes for crime come from a place of poverty, and there's no need to be criminalizing poverty or to be criminalizing homelessness. Instead, we have to provide the housing that people need to be able to get that foundational grounding to then build themselves up. So reducing police power and divestifying funds also provides we could also provide economic, recreational, and trauma services to youth. So instead of having police gang units that watch our youth outside of community centers, why don't we focus on giving youth something to do at the community centers? Why don't we focus on funding the community centers that our youth can go to? Why don't we fund the recreational activities that our youth can do and that they can participate in? So you could also then have a functioning mental health response team outside of police, jails, and prisons. So we need to be able to give people, once again, the supports that they need and not hoping that police will be able to de-escalate situations when they're simply not trained how to do it and they don't know how to do it. So this year, the Waterloo Regional Police Services had a budget of over $200 million. So this was $200,143,000. In 2019, the amount was a little bit lower than that, but they did receive an increase from 2019's budget up to 2020's budget, which is where they're now set at 200 million. So majority of the funds for Waterloo Regional Police Services come from our taxes. 34% of all total taxes within Waterloo Region went to police services, and they continue to do so every single year. The 200,000, not 200,000, the 200 million is also 19.9% of the region's total expenditure for the year of 2020. So you can compare this with public health, that's only allocated 4%. So public health right now is sitting at about $40,588,000. So who do we find more important in our society? Waterloo Regional Police Services that receives $200 million in funding, or public health that receives $40 million in funding, right? So why are we once again choosing to prioritize police over public health? I feel like the society that we need to live in is a society that is the inverse. So we need to be making sure that our social services are more funded first before we look to funding police services. And study after study has also showed that a living wage, adequate access to health services and treatment, educational opportunities, and stable housing are more effective than police or jails for preventing crime. So that's why now more than ever, there's a high demand to reduce the resources that are provided to the police, but instead to invest more in social services and the resources that keep communities safe without increasing crime. So investing resources into the community also makes sure people have the things that they need to thrive instead of setting them up for failure, instead of setting them up to be arrested, instead of setting up for them to be incarcerated, we're now setting them up to thrive instead. And a lot of the funds that actually go to Waterloo Regional Police Services, about 83%, is just going to staff salaries, right? So their actual running budget for the work that they do is only about 25% and less than 25%. So right now we're paying Waterloo Regional Police Services to just exist within our community, but everything else that they do, that funding could be drastically reduced, right? Why are we paying for 83% of salaries? That doesn't make sense to me, and it shouldn't really make sense to anybody else too. So anytime there is an increase to the Waterloo Regional Police Services budget, a lot of that money goes to salaries, including the 10% increase that happened from 2019 to 2020. A lot of those funds went to staff salaries as well. So as mentioned now, we are simply asking people to re-envision what an equitable community looks like, right? So what could we achieve if by, let's say, that $29.3 million ask that was provided, what could we achieve if we took that $29.3 million and instead we put it towards social assistance? Instead, we put it towards safe consumption sites. We put it towards housing, having community spaces, safer bike infrastructure, childcare, mental health, and other health services. So the way that our society currently exists, it has not always been that way. I think it's completely possible, and no, it's not radical, to think about a future where we're providing individuals with the things that they need. I also think considering that to be radical also talks about your point and your thought of humanity as a whole, because it shouldn't be radical to want to provide people with the items that they need to thrive and to survive. That's not a radical thought at all. That is basic humanity, I would say. So a practical example would also be, let's say in 2019, about $39 million of the GRT's budget came from fares that we pay. So if we were able to somehow remove funds from police and instead funnel that into public transit could be free for the entire region, right? So this is what we talk about when we say reimagining. Public transit doesn't have to cost funds. We have the funds available. So now we just have to be able to allocate them to the right place. We have to be able to move them to the right place. So part of the calls that were put forth to accompany the call for defunding police that happened during the march on June 3rd was also to remove the COPS program that currently serves some neighborhoods within Kitchener, as well as removing school resource officers from the Waterloo Regional District School Board and the Catholic School Board. So COPS essentially is a summer camp that runs for about 3 days, and police go into low-income neighborhoods. They sell this opportunity to families, talking about their kids will get to have a fun summer experience. They'll be able to go to camp, go rafting, pretty much experience the things that they can't do in the city, right? And that is amazing. We love giving kids opportunities to be able to explore nature, to be able to go rafting and to have fun experiences. But why do those experiences need to be accompanied by police? So with COPS, we want to be able to provide recreational activities to our youth, but we also acknowledge that that doesn't have to involve police. There doesn't need to have police presence when youth go to summer camp. So it also talks about the surveillance that happens, right? So think about a Black youth. A Black youth would now have police within their neighborhood. So they're being surveilled while they play at the park, when they go to community centers. Now the same youth would again have police surveillance when they go to summer camps, when they go for that recreational time. And then they will also have surveillance when they go to school, where they're supposed to be learning. And they also have surveillance when they're living, right? Because we know that we're also surveilled at higher rates, just as we're outside living. So having a COPS program, it continues the perpetual surveillance that a lot of Black people go through. And what we're saying is that we also need to be able to give families the autonomy to send their kids to summer camps that they want to. A lot of people don't want to be police, right? But because this is the only program that's offered to the low-income neighborhoods within Kitchener, they often take the opportunity because they want their kids to have fun. But we also want to give opportunities for kids to go maybe to engineering camp, to go to math camp, to go to music camp if they want. So we're saying take the funds that COPS already has right now, dismantle COPS, but instead make it a fund that's available for families to be able to apply to, and then they can receive that money and distribute it, and then send their kids to any camp of their choice, right? This also gives a chance for families to be heroes to the kids. I can imagine, like, my parents didn't have opportunities to send me to summer camp, so it would have been great if I would have been provided the chance to maybe go away for 3 days, do something I want. I've always been interested in dance and art, so maybe going to a summer camp where it's more artistic, like that would have been amazing. But if I'm going to summer camp, I don't want to go to summer camp where there's a police officer there, right? Because now there's, again, that surveillance that exists. There's also just the discomfort that exists with a lot of Black people and the mere presence of police, right? So even your opportunities of having fun, they're a little bit diminished because now you're in a space where there's police, and police's roles, regardless of if they're in summer camp, regardless of if they're not in uniform or they are in uniform, their first and primary role will always be as police officers. You can't necessarily go to them through the eyes of mentorship if you know that their first role will always be policing. Yeah. And on the right-hand side, there's a student quote that was obtained from Students for Inclusive Schools. So initially, we are the ones that made the call to have the SRO program removed from schools. But pretty much immediately after, we had a lot of students reach out to us telling us that they really wanted to get this done. And so they started organizing. So they took over that call to action. And now the students, high school students, as well as high school alums that have just graduated, they're the ones currently leading the movement to remove school resource officers. So the quote reads, "Walking through the halls and getting stares from SROs makes me feel uncomfortable and targeted. Being a Black male, seeing police presence within the school is extremely intimidating due to the fact that police brutality is a very real threat and concern for Black people. Having them within our school diverts our attention away from school and towards ensuring our own safety and security." So Students for Inclusive Schools, they've been successful right now in putting a pause onto the SRO program with the Waterloo Regional School Board. So the program is currently undergoing review. And so they're advocating to have that review done with a critical race lens, making sure that when they're interviewing students, they need to place priority on the students that are most affected by police presence and on the students that are most affected by police brutality and police harm. So those would be Black, Indigenous, and racialized students within the schools. The COPS program is also presently on hold, awaiting review. If you didn't know, within the past 20 years that COPS has been running, there has been zero review done to see if the program is working, if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. They essentially have been letting this program run in our low-income neighborhoods, in our low-income racialized neighborhoods for over 20 years without even stopping to think, should this program continue? Can this program be done differently? Are we maybe missing something when we're having this type of program run in these communities? So I think that to me is also alarming, because how can you not place value on the people that live within those communities to even give them the decency of reviewing this program and making sure it's serving their needs, right? So this kind of speaks to how unimportant those communities may be viewed, because when you're looking at government funding and when you're looking at where council is directing money for, I can promise you that there aren't a lot of things that they can funnel money into without actually having consistent reviews. So why is it that we can put a program into a low-income racialized neighborhood and nobody even touches documents or talks about it in any form for 20 years? So no other program would be able to have that amount of sustainability without even one report documenting what they're doing. And there isn't even any data about what goes on at that camp or any data about success from that camp. One of the things that also happened after the BLM Solidarity March on June 3rd was a collection of funds. So ourselves with Black Lives Matter Waterloo Region and some community activists and organizers, we were able to raise about $15,000 that was donated to a community center within Kitchener. The point that we wanted to make by donating these funds to a community center is that we want to give communities the autonomy, right? We want them to make their own decisions about where to send their kids to camp. So once again, we're not against giving kids the recreational opportunities, but we're saying that kids can have those opportunities without police presence. So that fund is going to be distributed within the local communities that are there, and parents are going to be able to apply for the money and then be able to send their kids to any summer camp of their choosing. So we are urging the region that if they want to give kids recreational opportunities, they can do it in that way, where they give autonomy and power to the families to be able to make the decision themselves about where to send their kids for the summer. There are a lot of arguments that come up when you talk about defunding police, and a lot of them surround reform, right? So reform is kind of changing the way that police works. More often than not, reform involves funneling more money into police services. For example, body cameras, right? If you want every single cop to have a body camera, it's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you a lot. So once again, we're taking a whole load of money and we're putting it towards police services again. And with body cameras, we all know that within the United States, police officers have body cameras. But take a look at what happened to George Floyd, right? We were still able to witness through some of the officers' body cameras. Other officers' body cameras were turned off. For some of them, the data went missing. Nobody knows where it went. But we were still able to see that death. So body cameras are not going to stop people from being killed. They're not going to stop people from experiencing harm. What they are going to do is now capture our deaths and capture our harm and pretty much sensationalize them and share them to the general public. So what we're saying is stop harming us. And by insinuating that you can solve the problem with body cameras, it's saying, no, instead we want to watch you be harmed, right? And so that's not the narrative that we want. So very often body cam footage goes missing before it can be reviewed. Very often body cameras are somehow turned off before an escalation happens. The footage is never seen. It is sometimes deleted. Sometimes there's no audio to the body camera. And it's also up to the police themselves to give up that footage. And then the police also will review and investigate that footage, right? So again, police investigating police. If I had to investigate myself for doing something wrong, I probably wouldn't say I did anything wrong because I'm investigating myself. So no, body cameras do not stop the killings. All they do is capture them and then publicize them for everyone's eye, which can once again be traumatic itself, because now other Black people are also experiencing that harm by watching it happen. There's also implicit bias trainings that's brought up. This one is a super popular one. Everyone thinks that 1 hour session, a 1 hour session of implicit bias training will somehow reverse over 400 years of colonization and colonialism, which it's not going to happen. So there was even a meta-analysis that was reviewed of about 492 police implicit bias trainings. The conclusion, it was that trainings have no effect on police violence. All they do is that if police are getting tested on how to respond to racial incidents, they'll be able to pass the test because they took the training. However, when it actually comes to practice and instilling what they learned in their daily methods of policing, that does not transfer over. Implicit bias trainings also often includes having tokens within the groups and within the trainings. So diversity within policing can also mean that individuals from our community are now helping enact harm against us, which is not an improvement once again. And then we get to diversity and inclusion task forces. This is another very popular one, but again, a 1 hour diversity and training session is not going to undo 400 years of colonialism. It's just not going to happen. So these are also seen as stalling tactics, right? Because you have community organizers, you have activists, you have people talking about how anti-racism impacts them and talking about how to actually tackle anti-racism in a meaningful way. And instead, a lot of organization and a lot of government bodies, they opt to create a task force, right? So they're stalling, they're buying time. They're not trying to actually do meaningful work. They want to be able to stall long enough because often results from these task forces will take years. So they're trying to stall long enough until they can maybe again create another task force that now looks at the work that the first task force does, right? So it's always a constant loop where work isn't actually being done, but they are stalling for time. Also, diversity and inclusion is not the same as being actively anti-racist. Being actively anti-racist acknowledges that racialized folks are not all under the same blanket, and that experiences that exist for Black individuals, experiences that exist for Indigenous individuals, and experiences that exist for Asian individuals, for Indian individuals, our experiences are not the same. Racism takes different forms for different groups. So when you're talking about anti-racism work, you're talking about works that tackles the specificities of the pervasive racism that exists for that particular community, which these task forces don't do because they look at racism as just one blanket statement or just one blanket action. So if you really want to be anti-racist, you're going to focus on the meaningful aspects of removing structures that harm Black, Indigenous, and racialized people instead of placing it under the D&I umbrella. And one of the things that's coming up a lot recently is community officers. So community officers is pretty much having individuals that live within the neighborhoods be the one that patrol and be the one that enforce laws rather than police officers. So community officers can't solve problems that cause crime, but they can displace them temporarily. Another thing that I want to bring out is the Stanford prison experiment. A lot of people that are on this call went to UW. Professors love using this one. I'm sure if you've sat in on a Psych 101 or a Sociology 101 class, this was one of the first examples that you learned and one of the first research experiments that was taught to you. For those that don't know though, the Stanford prison experiment essentially took regular college students and they placed them in a facility. So these students were divided into two groups. One group was going to be prisoners, where the other group was going to be officers. So this group of people was placed into a facility, and this experiment was supposed to run for about 2 weeks. So the prisoners, of course, had no power within the experiments. They're prisoners. They're trying to emulate the real prison experiment, whereas the guards, they had all of the power. What they found was that within 6 days, so remember, this was supposed to happen for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, but within 6 days, they had to end the experiment just because of the amount of power that the guards were perceiving, and they were actually now causing harm on the people that are prisoners. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because you can have regular citizens assume positions of power, but when you do that, that perceived power can actualize, right? So they can then produce harm because of the position of power that they've been given. So you take a look at also diversifying police officers. So I touched on that a little bit earlier. Yes, you can diversify a police force, but when you're putting a Black person or a racialized person within a system that perpetuates harm and perpetuates anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, that individual will not be able to stand up against that culture, right? Because that culture is so deeply ingrained within the institution of policing itself, they won't be able to do that job alone. So even if you were to take a random person off the street, as soon as you give them that power akin to being a police officer, as long as you provide that to them, that power will actualize. So they will then be creating a whole new form of policing that still brings the same harm. So think about the Stanford prison experiment. It lasted 6 days. That's how quickly the power shift happened in people's minds, right? So these were people that they just got off the street through a newspaper ad. And within 6 days, they had actualized their power so much that they were causing harm. Prisoners or people that were placed in the role of prisoners, like they were crying, they were pleading, begging to leave because of the harm that they were experiencing. So we can't put people into positions of power like policing and expect them to not actualize that power. So at the end of the day, even if you do have community officers, that's a new form of policing you're enacting. And with that, it would also bring harm. So we're getting to the close of the presentation here. And I think the key point that was being made with everything said is that defunding is simply reinvesting. We want to reinvest in our communities because we've been taking from our communities for too long, and it's time to stop. We want to reinvest in our communities because study after study has been done showing that by addressing root crimes, you actually solve crime. Right? By funneling police budgets, crime is still going up every single year. So it's not as if we give police more money, crime goes down, we can see the impacts of our funds and what is going on. We give police more money, instead crime goes up. So now we have to start thinking, what we've been doing so far is clearly not working. Crime is not going down, hate crimes are increasing. So what exactly is causing crime? And can we instead tackle that? Instead of being reactive to crime, we can now start to be proactive. So when we talk about defunding, we're talking about reinvesting in our communities. All right, so this is just some information for the ACB Network. If you want to take a look at some of the work that we're doing, a lot of this presentation is also available on our website at acbnetworkwr.com. You can additionally find us on Facebook as well as Twitter. On Twitter, we are under the username of @ACB. So I guess I'll now open it up to Saf and some questions.
Thank you so much, Lang, for that wonderful presentation. It was super informative, and I think everyone's really grateful for you to be here. And thank you for taking the time to do this. I really, really appreciate it. So yeah, as Lang said, it is time for questions. So feel free to turn on your camera and raise your hand if you would like to ask a question out loud, or use the chat feature and I can read the question for you. So the floor is yours. We do have about an hour left for this town hall, and the time is absolutely yours. You're getting thank yous from several people.
You're all welcome. Like, it's a lot of this conversation, I think it's hard to cross over to people because you hear the word defunding and automatically it's like panic bells are ringing, right? But it's not as complicated as some people may think. We're just talking about, again, reinvesting. We see that what we've been doing isn't working, so maybe let's do something else, right? Let's get back to the basics. Let's solve problems from the root, and then we can go from there instead of expecting that we now have policing, we have this body of power that's going to take care of all our social problems. Police are not a one-all be-all solution, right? So if we want our society to thrive, if we want our communities to thrive, we need to actually start giving them the support that they need. And a lot of the root causes even of crime are money, right? So this brings in the conversation of separating capitalism and just the world running on money to racism, right? They feed off of each other. They're both power structures that work to keep people down. So we need to start giving communities the money to uplift themselves, because a lot of the problems that exist right now are seriously just caused because of poverty.
More thank yous. I haven't seen any questions left. I haven't seen any questions yet. Yeah, once again, reiterating, the floor is yours. This is your time to ask any questions. And I just want to take some time to talk about why, while everyone thinks about their questions, why UWASA specifically thought it was important to have this event. And so Lang emailed several post-secondary student groups, Black post-secondary student groups, to support this demand for defunding the police. And our concern was first and foremost that we can't stamp the UWASA name on this movement, regardless of our own personal beliefs and regardless of our own individual political beliefs and, you know, our own views on this issue, without consulting everyone. So we just wanted to host this space so people can ask their questions free of any judgment, free of any fear, and just allow people to ask their questions and get an open and transparent response. So a question that I have for you actually is, how did you get the $29.3 million figure?
Yeah, so $29.3 million, we actually got that from the amount of budget increases that Waterloo Regional Police Services has had for the past 3 years, right? So remember the example I used earlier where public health overall has a budget of about $40 million. Waterloo Regional Police Services was able to get a $29.3 million increase just within the last 3 years. So that kind of brings into perspective the amount of funding that police gets in contrast to other social services that exist. So that's how we got the $29.3 million.
So Vic has a couple questions. The first one is, why do you think people are so resistant to defunding the police?
Mm-hmm. So like I said earlier, I think it's just the strength of the word defunding. Maybe strength is not like the right adjective to use, but when you hear defunding, it's a very strong word, right? So a lot of people think that this means not having police at all, which we know our society is very, very far from not having policing altogether. But I think the resistance to defunding comes from that knowledge gap that some people may have, where you're not necessarily sure what defunding is. So because you hear the word and it seems like such a strong word, you become hesitant to support defunding. And that's why I wanted to shift that language a little bit and now call it reinvesting. Because I think when you hear reinvesting, it's not as strong and it's not as stark as it would be when you're hearing defund.
Mm-hmm.
So by saying reinvestment, I think we can kind of demystify a little bit of police defunding, and it kind of gets to the root of what we're trying to do instead. So now we're saying we want to put money to our communities. Police cannot do everything that police are currently set out to do. So let's fund the people that can. So I think that's where some of the resistance comes from.
I can second that from like I've been seeing online. What ways have, another question from Victoria, what ways have elected officials supported or denied this call?
Maybe I'll start with denied because that's the easy one. They just kind of deny us and our existence. That's one of the ways that they have denied this call. We've reached out, to some elected officials as well as some regional representatives. Some of them we've gotten 0 responses to our email. So I think that in itself is just a stark denial of everything that we're trying to do. And also we've been asking them publicly to reach out to us because we want to have those conversations. We want to talk about what it means to defund, right? Like, we're not in a war with our representatives because we know that they're the ones who have the power to get things done. Mm-hmm. So we constantly do ask them to engage with us, but a lot seem to be very resistant to that as well. But we have had some elected officials, especially MPP Laura May Lindo, who is for Kitchener Centre. She has been very vocal with support for defunding. So she's always talking about defunding, what it means to defund, and she's also the leader of the NDP's Black Caucus, for those that didn't know. So she's been a very strong and prominent voice within our recent calls to defund. So I think that's one elected official that has been very vocal about her support. But we also have had some counselors that reach out to us saying they do want to learn more. And we take those opportunities to engage in phone calls with them and to tell them what defunding means. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the ways that we've seen them support. But we also would like to shift the support from just being our own little Zoom meetings to being support that's vocal, right? Because they're the stakeholders within our community and they're the ones that have the power. If police, for example, presented a budget next year and the budget was $200 million, currently what it is now, Regional Council has the power to say, no, we're not going to approve that $200 million budget. Go back, rework on it, and present it to us again. So they have the power to do that. They may not necessarily have the power to tell police to remove $29.3 million from their budget, but they can say, no, we're not going to approve a $200 million budget. You need to rework this and then present council with another budget that we can approve. So that's one of the ways that they do have the power. And so we want them to engage with us and we want them to amplify our voices publicly, like talk about this to your constituents, and let them know that you support defunding, let them know why you support defunding. I think that's one of the things that's missing right now. We're having a lot of closed door meetings, but people are still hesitant, or our elected officials are still hesitant to come out and say, I do support this and I do support what they're talking about.
Thank you for that. So another question from Celine, she's a Waterloo student. With regards to campus police services, how would defunding look on Waterloo campuses?
So I can be honest and actually say I'm not too sure about the answer to this question. It's came up a lot in our discussions as the advisory committee from the network. However, from my understanding, it seems like there's a different structure that exists for campus policing, which is different than the regular structure for like Waterloo Regional Police. So I think why we didn't include campus police within our calls was because we were still trying to figure out ourselves what that relationship looks like between universities, the university police departments and the regular police departments. So I do want to say though that if there are any students that are interested in organizing and mobilizing to remove campus police, we're more than happy to help them out with that because we're still doing research about how that relationship functions. So we're happy to collaborate on that too and make sure that it's student-led, because this is something that impacts students most. And I am a U Waterloo alum, so I do have some prior interactions that we've had with the Waterloo University Policing Services. I've actually forgotten what they're called, but we've had some conversations with the head of policing there, so we've had previous interactions too.
So before I go back to the written questions, Cyan has raised her hand, so I'll just unmute her and allow her to speak.
Oh, I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you. I was just going to add to what Lang was saying. I'm a professor at Laurier, and there's been lots of conversations amongst BIPOC students around campus policing. And there's actually been some movement on our campus in terms of consulting with campus police and moving the needle in terms of what students are needing and decreasing the presence of campus police on our campuses. And so I do think that could be a by-campus initiative. And so I wanted to just sort of echo and reiterate some of what Lang was saying, that there is interest from the ACB network in supporting that. And I think that there's also the opportunity for a by-campus or multi-campus initiatives around decreasing and addressing campus policing more generally. So just wanting to put that out there.
Thank you so much for sharing. The next question from Anthea for Lang. Are there any political representatives in Waterloo discussing this topic or engaging in these conversations? So I'm assuming she means people outside of ACB.
Yeah, so I think I kind of touched on this earlier with the regional representatives. Like I said, Laura May Lindo has been very vocal about her support. We've had people that are not necessarily in office right now that have also shown their support. For example, Mike Morris, who also spoke at the regional town hall. He's not a political figure within our region. He did run for office last year. Unfortunately, he was unsuccessful, but he's also been very vocal with his support. We also have Lori Campbell, who has been very, very vocal. So once again, Lori Campbell ran for office, but she was unsuccessful as well. But she has been instrumental in echoing some of the calls that we've been pushing forward. And I would say that the people I just listed off are also very well respected members of the community. So even though they're not necessarily political representatives, they are still people that I would consider to be stakeholders because they do a lot of valuable work to our community.
Okay. So we have Kanal, who has raised her hand. So I'll just unmute her and lower her hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to point out the clarity of this presentation that Lang has given, and echoing that point that she's made around political representation and political voices not speaking up or being public, rather having private meetings. I don't think we can go forward without naming that we're having a town hall 2 days after the region held their town hall. And I think Lang, among other presenters, pointed out the engagement of trauma porn and re-traumatizing of the Black community by all racialized communities, actually, by sharing our stories. And I recognize that there are representatives of the region in attendance for this call. And I kind of want Lang to kind of tell me how she receives that, given the way the town hall ended on Friday with harmful racist rhetoric. As you point out, the silence, the public silence, but private engagement of political leaders in the region.
Okay. That conversation yesterday, or sorry, it wasn't even yesterday, it was a couple of days ago, but it left the entire town hall, for me personally right now, not speaking as a network representative, like for me as a person, the entire town hall, I think, started off on a sour note just because of the questions that they provided prior to the town hall, which were very based on people sharing their experiences. And I don't believe in resharing our experiences. A lot of data has been collected talking about our experiences. You don't need me to once again like relive some of my darkest moments, and I won't do that at all. But I think it started on a sour note, but with that last speaker, that just pushed it over the edge. So what I do want to point out is almost the irresponsibility that the region had by creating that town hall in that space. So we put forward, us as well as other organizers, because there's a lot of organizing happening within the region. You know, there were specific calls to action that were put forth. And instead of focusing on those calls to action, a town hall was created. Okay, that's fine. We can deal with the town hall. But now this town hall is also allowing people that aren't impacted to have the opportunity to speak, right? So I don't think the region recognizes how much harm that can have on BIPOC individuals. Like, it's harmful to be allowing people that can talk, like that last presentation did, where they're invalidating our experiences, right? So like by doing that, the region said, come on everyone, share your worst stories about racism to tell us that they exist within the region. But then the region also says, well, we're not gonna tell people that are gonna invalidate your experiences to not attend, right? So they're saying, bring all of your racist stories, but they're saying now you have people that can still push racist narratives within your moment of telling your instances of racism. So I think just the way the event itself was set up, it was not set up to be a safe space. It was not set up to have meaningful conversation. And once again, at this point, we should also have other people calling that out. There should be other people talking about, no, when you're having an event where people are talking about their trauma, it should absolutely not be okay to, within that same space, have others that can invalidate those experiences or even bring harm to those experiences. So I think that was definitely a miscalculation. I feel like even saying miscalculation might be too nice, but it was definitely an oversight from the region, just because, I mean, we just went through days of sharing our stories, and now the very last presentation that we have is someone saying everything being said is useless, right? So imagine how, as a Black individual, that can make you feel. But once again, we need to have our other regional representatives talking about this. It can't just be us. So we need them to be able to call that out too, and to also remember that when you're creating these spaces for BIPOC individuals, you need to make sure you're creating spaces that are safe, instead of creating spaces that once again allow us to experience further harm.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think even within the school, trying to address racism on its campus, many students are very, very frustrated with having to relive and reshare their experiences. And I think it's quite gaslighting to have to make students relive and retell those experiences. I think we're way past that. There's papers, there's research. Anyways, I don't want to rant about that.
Also gaslighting when you allow people that say like that's not real to attend, right? Because it's like, why then am I here if you're also going to allow someone to invalidate every single thing I say and to gaslight me to also participate in this conversation? It doesn't make sense.
Agreed. So Beisan has a question. So I'll just, okay, she's muted. So go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks. First of all, I just thought that was a wonderful presentation. I was hoping that the deck could perhaps be made available. I thought it was just super dense with information and I wanted to refer back to it. But really great. And so this is gonna, there's a couple, so I ran regionally in the last election. I spoke at that town hall as well about being one of only 2 racialized people running. I feel like I have, and I understand that there's some people from the region who are listening, I feel like I have a sense of the mindsets and the limits of a lot of the currently elected officials. And I want to hope for the ability to change minds, and I want to hope for a radical reimagining of, you know, reallocation, you know, reinvestment in the community from currently elected officials. But I want to also propose the possibility that that might not come, and that we're going to have a long wait in front of us in order to get actual institutional change, hopefully by the next election. So I want to, first of all, it's so hard to think about that momentum being stalled and those people pulling all the energy that you have out of you in this moment, because I'm so afraid that that's what's going to happen when the conversation can be changed or can be distracting. I guess to get to my kind of the core of my issue is we need young, smart people of color, not just young, all kinds of experiences to actually, and it's hard to do, but like run in the next elections, run regionally, provincially, and federally, in order to get those levels of change actually passed and that money moved. How do you see that happening when that is also demanding more work, more energy, more sacrifice from the same people that are supposed to be helped and that are vulnerable and that we're trying to, like, I'm having trouble kind of balancing that. Can you please, do you have any thoughts on like how we can get more people excited about trying to change politics when it's been so negative and it's been so alienating in the first place?
So I think there are also some counselors that are watching here, but one thing I do want to say is that we are here, like we see things, we see the silence,
Yeah.
we feel the silence, right? So this is something that we're going to continue to acknowledge and to have in the back of our minds as elections come up and as we're choosing the people to represent us, because by their silence, they're saying that our communities don't matter, right? They're saying that they can ignore us, we can be overlooked, and they're not going to advocate for us. So I just want to let people know that we are seeing that and we're cognizant of that, just for future reference. But also one thing that I like to push for is that people are giving up their time to be doing anti-racism work, and they need to be compensated if they're going to be doing so. So you can't expect to create, let's say, like a EDI task force or whatever task force people like to create and expect those people or those individuals that are actually impacted to sit on those task forces, to retell their experiences, to do unpaid labor, right? So this is unpaid labor on top of their day jobs and not want to compensate them. So the people that are advocating and people that are doing this work, if you politicians and if our government officials are going to be engaging with them, they also need to be aware of their time and how valuable people's time is, because not only now are people impacted by racism, but they also have to fight racism in their spare time, right? Like there's no time to rest. You go to work, you come home, you fight racism. You go to bed, you wake up the next day, you do the exact same thing. So people's time is valuable. As people do anti-racism work, our officials need to acknowledge the value of that time, and they need to make sure that they compensate individuals that are literally doing the work for them, because this is the work that they're supposed to be doing, right? They're supposed to be advocating for us, not the other way around. So if we're going to be doing their jobs, there should also come with compensation.
Thank you for answering that. I just want to quickly reiterate that I appreciate that everyone is feeling free to speak, and I can appreciate the diverse types of people that are here. I understand that there are people from the community that are here, but the voices that I want to be heard first and foremost are the voices of students, because this platform is created for students to have a voice and to be more involved in regional affairs. So I'll be mostly focusing on student questions for the remainder of this town hall. Victoria has raised her hand, so I'll let her speak.
Okay, yeah, so I think I just wanted to, like, as you said, go back to what it is that students are asking for. I think so on the Friday call that we've been talking about, like, Lang is completely correct, and like how that event was allowed to end was actually extremely violent, and I think is a part of the like colonial like tactic and practice to kind of like force Black people to re-traumatize themselves for their own almost like pleasure, to be honest, because I don't know what good could come from that. And then secondly, like just even to, I think her name is Basan, to her last point about like Black people engaging in these politics, like ultimately I think that like that would do us as a people like no justice. Mostly because like these are the same systems that have been oppressing Black people for at least the last 400 years. So I'm not sure how like going and being a part of these things and taking up these spaces does us any sort of justice. I don't think that's what justice for us would look like. At least like speaking for myself. I think one thing that like, you know, in just doing this work on campus, and one thing that I'm really excited to see is that like how you were similarly president of base, and like now you're doing this work and you're very easily able to see like how these things are how they operate in tandem. I suppose that like of course like Waterloo region is such a dangerous place for Black people because the University of Waterloo is also a very dangerous space for Black people. And I think that like I have my like own questions as to like, you know, like how do we go into kind of like addressing that in a way that is wholesale, like what, like disinvesting I think is great, and I think that's the first step, and I think that might even be kind of what reparations like would look and sound like. But from like a community level, like what does it look like for us to start like reclaiming these things without necessarily waiting for people to do it for us who honestly might never end up doing it, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of mobilizing and organizing. So I know Equity for Who within the universities is doing a lot of great things. So they're calling out the administration right now for a lot of racism that BIPOC students experience. And even just from that simple act of organizing, they were able to make monumental change, right? Because now I believe it was the VP of Equity that recently stepped down because she was not fit to be in her role. And so now somebody that's actually equipped to do that job will be able to take it. So I think there's a lot of power that comes with organizing and mobilizing. And while you're doing that, there's also the recognition that needs to come, as you were saying, Victoria, that these systems do not act independently, and they don't exist independently, right? So there is colonial mindset and colonial backing to every single system that exists within education, within politics, within policing, within housing. Every single thing that you can think of, they do exist in tandem, and they all feed off of each other. So I think divestifying funds from police is kind of the first step. And it's also a very bold move because police are some of our biggest oppressors today, right? Like they're killing us, they are harming us at alarming rates, and everybody should be talking about that. So I think by starting with divestifying funds from police, we can then also build into the other facets that exist. And we're even continuing the fight that started years and years ago. So this movement did not start right now, it started 400 years ago. And I think we're getting to a place where we're organizing a lot more, and a lot more younger people are starting to organize as well. And we're organizing in a different form. So we're no longer satisfied with the little things that they would give us, like the task forces, like having anti-racism training. Now we're actually starting to call for action. And I think by continuing with that momentum, that's how work can actually be done, instead of waiting for politicians, like you said, to be able to do something. Because more often than not, we have seen that in faces of oppression, they will choose silence. They will not advocate for us. So that's something, yes, that's the burden we now have to bear as well. But I think it's also something that we are doing a very good job of mobilizing, and we're doing a good job of taking back our autonomy and saying, no, we're not accepting, and we're not satisfied with the little that you want to give us. We are worthy, you know, we're deserving of more, and we're deserving to be valued and acknowledged within our society. So we're not going to stop until that's the place that we're at. So I think there's a lot of power with organizing, regardless if that's in the university space or if it's within the greater community, but it does produce results.
Thank you. So Samaya, who is a University of Waterloo student, has a question. Her question is, without the support of city councilors, how can we as residents push for the defunding of the police?
So I shared a very lovely website during the presentation that was defund.ca. Defund.ca makes it super easy to be able to contact your local representatives. This is how you, as a resident, put pressure on them as well, right? So defund.ca allows you to be able to call your counselors, be able to communicate, send them tweets, send them emails, call them to push the calls to defund forward, right? Because a lot of it is also public pressure. The public needs to be applying pressure to our elected officials to get them to actually do their job and to get them to do the work. So I think we need to continue getting people that are vocal. We need to continue getting people that talk about defunding. Even honestly, I would say talk about defunding to your friends and to your smaller circles, because we need to demystify what it is. So the general public needs to know. But you can put pressure on local politicians by being vocal about your support as well.
Okay. And I got this message privately, so I'm assuming this person wants to be anonymous. But their question is, how can we make sure that BIPOC voices can reach a place where they can make real change? So okay, I'm going to read the whole thing. I tried contacting members of the Waterloo Regional Police about the community's demand to defund the police. However, the response was very underwhelming, basically saying that the regional council has little to no say over the budget. How can we make sure that BIPOC voices can reach a place where they can make real change?
So I just want to start by addressing that, BIPOC individuals have been making a lot of change over the past years. Like I said, organizing did not start today. It didn't start with the death of George Floyd. Organizing has been happening for a long time. So I think we first need to accept that we are drivers of change. We can do it. I mean, they're trying to tell us that we can't, but we know we can do it because we've seen it actualized by our ancestors and by the people that came before us. So I just wanted to let you know that we do have the power. Don't, just because politicians are evasive of their job, it doesn't mean that we're still not capable of creating change, especially within our region. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, I forgot.
So basically, how can the voices reach a place where they're actually heard and can affect real change?
Oh, where they're heard. Okay, maybe I sound like a broken record now, but be public and be vocal about your support. Let them know that you can send out a tweet, send out a Facebook message, status, whatever, but you can say, I contacted this person. You can say it publicly to talk about defunding, to talk about divestment of funds, and they said no, or they said this. So I think that's something that our counselors shield themselves with, or even the police services, where they can send you an email and they know that email is not going to leave your inbox. So whatever they tell you just kind of stays there. But you can then also make it known that you're trying to reach out to your counselors. You can make it known that you're trying to reach out to police services, but they're not providing formidable results, right? So this is another part of accountability that we have the power to do, because we're not going to be able maybe to change all of their minds, but we can hold them accountable to the spaces and the positions that they've decided to take up within our region.
Mm-hmm. So another question from a Waterloo student: how do international students encourage local politicians?
Mm-hmm. So it would be very much in the same way. Support the organizing that's going on, be vocal about supporting the organizing that's going on. And just because you're an international student, don't think you can't take part in the local movements, because even while you go to Waterloo, right, like this is your community and this is where you're going to be for 4 or 5 years. So I would hope that you'd want your 4 to 5 years to be great years, right? You don't want to come here as an international student looking for better, or not better education, but looking for different educational opportunities, but only to come here and be met with rife racism, right? So I think as an international student, there's the acceptance that this is also your community. You can also advocate for your community as you're here too.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you to speak a little bit more to that, because I feel like from my personal experience and the experience of the people that are, in my immediate circle, as a University of Waterloo student specifically, especially if you're a co-op student, where you're only in Waterloo for 4 months at a time, you get sucked into that bubble and you don't really acknowledge the things that are going on around you. So I know, can you like give like a bit of motivational something to encourage people to be more involved in these things and why they should actually care?
Yeah. I would say it's hard to break up that bubble because trust me, I went to U Waterloo, so I know how sometimes you can be so secluded to everything else going on just because you're trying to survive the school that it gets hard to do other things. But I think it even starts with being involved within the school that you go to as well, whether that be U Waterloo, Laurier, or Conestoga. Because community organizing also involves organizing that's happening within UW, right, or within Laurier. So I think if international students are finding themselves in a place where it feels like you don't relate to the outside community, or you feel like you don't have opportunities to engage with the broader community, you can instead engage with the organizing that's happening on campus, right? So I think SCN mentioned earlier, Laurier students are going to be starting to mobilize against defunding police. So I think that's something maybe international students that go to Laurier would be able to take part in, because now you're talking about Laurier itself. You're not necessarily talking about the broader community. So there's that sense of a relationship that exists with organizing within the university space. And people that go to UW, they can help with organizing with Equity for Who, right? So they can start that way. Or you can even start being involved with political organizations or organizations within the school that you see have a political voice. And then you can start building from there. You may not feel like the broader community is your community yet, but there is your community within the school, and there is organizing within that community. So that is where you can start.
It's a really great point. So Celine, who is a UWaterloo student, is saying, to add on the being vocal point, what about students with precarious immigration status and the fear of being targeted and surveyed as a result of their vocalness?
That's a good one, yes. Yeah, no, I think that is actually a real threat, because I know that a lot of surveillance is a very real thing, first of all, to put that out there. You know, we're being surveilled every single day. Everything that we post is being surveilled. This Zoom call is probably being surveilled. So surveillance is very real, and the danger that comes from being surveilled, especially when your immigration status is not yet a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. What I can say is that maybe if you're not in the position to be vocal in public about those things, you can get in contact to local organizations or local students that are doing that work, and then you can see if they need support, right? Because being vocal can come in many forms. You can also help them out if they're ever doing anything, so that doesn't put your face out there, because the organization or the student group would be speaking with your influence from behind the scenes. So I would say that's kind of one of the ways where you can help with organizing. So you can maybe go through organizations, so that way you're not at the forefront and your status still can be safe. Because the first thing we want people to do is to be safe, right? We don't want anyone getting deported just to stand on the backs of social movements. We want to make sure everyone is still able to live here and to be here and to exist here within the space. So I think if immigration status is a worry, you can always reach up the local organizations that are doing work, see if they need support, let them know that you would like to support in a back end way, not front facing. And I'm sure they would always be able to direct you on some things that you can help out with.
That's a really great point. We have half an hour left, so please keep the questions coming. No one has raised their hand and no one has asked any further questions, so please keep the questions coming. I actually have one question for you. So I know you mentioned that the $29.3 million comes from the 3 years of increases in the budget. So has ACB looked into any research on like the level of crime that's happened over that time period, or the number of arrests?
I don't have exact numbers, but crime has not really gone down. I can tell you that much. So crime has been on an increase in our region since 2015, but it's either 2015 or 2016. So crime has been gradually increasing. Police budgets have been gradually increasing. We don't necessarily know what Waterloo Regional Police Services have to show for their budget increases.
Thank you. Any more questions, feel free to drop them in the question box. Zach has a comment. The police is not the redeemer, the good angel who protects and safeguards. That's politicians and the elected. That's what politicians and elected representatives want us to believe. They are inherently there to protect these people at our cost. And what we are seeing now and the resistance we are facing to defund the police is the racist underpinning of the colonial empire. Agreed.
Agreed. And like, you also have to take a look at who do the police protect, right? So if you see police in an affluent white neighborhood, you know they're there to keep people that look like you away. You know they're going to stop you and ask you, what are you doing in that neighborhood? Because you're not the person they're there to protect, right? You're the person they're there to protect from. Whereas when they come to our community, they're there to actually police us. They're not there to protect us. So you think about, who are the police there to actually protect within our society? And this is definitely from like colonial foundations, because they were there to enforce white supremacist ideology, right? You think about slave patrols that existed. Police were created to patrol the streets for runaway slaves. From their inception, it has been about surveilling and policing Black people and Black bodies. So they are not there to protect us. That's not why they're created, and that's not how they function today.
A good documentary to watch, 13th, will open your mind to everything Lang is saying. Yeah, defunding is not a new concept. It's just gotten a lot more sensationalized with recent events, but defunding is definitely not a new concept.
Yes, there have been so many theorists that talk about defunding and abolition. Angela Davis, just to hype her up. So if you guys want reading lists, you know, you can start with Angela Davis, Are Prisons Obsolete? You can start with Robin Maynard's Policing Black Lives from Slavery Till Today. You can start with Desmond Cole, The Skin We're In, tracing pretty much, I believe it was the year of 2019 in Toronto, and just the movements that are happening there. So there's so much literature for you guys to enjoy to learn more about defunding.
One more, Howard Adams' 1975 Prison Grass, another one.
I haven't seen that or read it, sorry, but I'll write it down. I'll make a note.
And Miriam Kaba also.
Miriam Kaba is great. A lot of amazing podcasts that she's been featured on, talk about abolitionist framework. So I can co-sign that one too.
What can you say about, let's just say it works out, you get approval that the police is going to be defunded by $23 million. What would you say would be the first place that we would reinvest some of this money into?
So there's a lot of interconnectedness, right? And I don't think there's one area that supersedes the other, just because all these systems feed into each other. So I think when we're talking about the reallocation of those funds, at that point, I would then like go to theorists, go to people that deal with funds to see what would be the best way to trickle down and to have those funds actually distributed to the services that would be able to then feed off into everything else. For me, I would personally want to see a lot more investments in public housing, just because that's something I know probably you think about, people my age think about as well. And making sure that you have a house to live in, that's your first foundation, right? So that's what sets you up to be able to even go looking for a job to bring about economic prosperity to your family, right? You need to be able to have a secure source of housing. I think about homelessness within our region. There are a lot of people that are homeless within Waterloo region. I saw even going to, I forgot the place that's called, it's along Weber and Victoria, but there are even some sheds that are kind of set up there for people to live, right? And if Waterloo is this inclusive, awesome society that everyone is selling it out to be, why do we then have people that don't have homes? So I think that's one of the areas that I would like to see prioritized. We want to make sure that people aren't being criminalized for being poor. We want to make sure people aren't being criminalized for being homeless. And yeah, let's just stop criminalizing poverty altogether. Yes, right by Worth a Second Look. Tennille just mentioned it in the comments. That's exactly where it was.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand and ask any more questions. We do have about 25 minutes left. This time is yours. Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, I think we may just be able to wrap up early if there aren't any more questions. Thank you once again, Lang, for this wonderful presentation and for taking the time to be here and provide this information to everyone. For those of you who were asking earlier, the recording will be available. I don't know where, but it will be available, and you can check our social media for updates on where it will be available. And yeah, keep updated with UWASA. Those of you who are here that are UWASA members, we will be sending an email basically showing you either the PDF of Lang's presentation and the video for you to watch, and asking whether you think UWASA should support this. And yeah, and those are pretty much the next steps for us. Thank you so much for being here. To everyone who's a UWaterloo student, who's not a UWaterloo student, members of the community, I really appreciate those of you who ask questions, and thank you so much for being in this space.
So I'm actually going to post the link to the slides because it was done on Google Slides, just to make sure everyone has them available. They will also be available on our website, so people won't have editing rights to the video, but you should be able to see it. And then, yeah, it'll go up on our website too on a link.
So Sian is asking, can you please instruct people on how to cite the network?
Yes, please. So if you are citing the network, please at least, well, not at least, please first of all, make sure that it is acknowledged that this is intellectual property belonging to the ACB network. So that's one of the first things that needs to be out there, but also please just link to our website too whenever you're sharing our materials, just so people can know where they can go for a more holistic picture of the information that we're sharing, because sometimes it is in bits and pieces. So we want people to have more wholesome versions of the information that we produce and share. So please always link back to our website too. Cite Black people's work. Yes, Sian. It is labor.
Yeah, so I don't think anyone has anything else to say. Once again, thank you so much to everyone who came. This is way more than I expected. I didn't think anyone would be here on a Sunday afternoon. Thank you, and we hope to be able to host more spaces like these for you in the future. Thank you, Lang.
Thank you, everyone that came out. We really appreciate even the interest in hearing us speak and sharing why we would like to see the divestment of funds and reinvestment into our communities, and even seeing the amount of people that tuned in today. I know we didn't share the event as much because I wanted to keep it very student focused, and I knew publicizing it might just draw in like the broader community when I know students are often left out of the conversation. So I wanted to create a space for them. But just having the amount of people that showed up, you know, it shows that people are interested, people do want to learn more. And this is a movement that people are invested in. So I do want to thank everyone that attended. Please be sure to talk about divestment of funds and reinvestment of funds to communities, even to your friends, you know, in everyday conversation. Because a lot of people think that these conversations can be limited to online too, but we need to start advocating for our rights to live as we live every single day. It shouldn't just be in advocacy spaces. It should be in your house when you're having dinner with your friends. You should be able to talk about your advocacy and how this impacts your life. So I'm hoping that people are able to bring these conversations as they bring these conversations essentially to their daily lives. I guess that's all I'm asking. A personal ask for me, just to be able to talk about it more. Let's demystify it. Let's stop calling it radical, because we just want to live. Like, that's all we're talking about here. And we want to make sure that everyone in our society, not only Black people, get to live too, you know, because when we talk about reinvesting, we know that not all the people that are substance users are Black. We know that not all of the people that are homeless are Black, but we're fighting for the better good of everyone, right? So we want to make sure that we're bringing every single person up. And that's what we want to see when we reinvest funds to our community.
Thank you. Well said.
Thank you all. Have a great evening and enjoy, I guess, the long weekend tomorrow.
Yeah, have a great long weekend, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
I can't figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
It's okay, I'll just end the meeting.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.